Hello, I'm Victoria. I'm a university lecturer and a professional photographer of many years standing. I've taught many people how to think like a pro, and now I've recorded this 45-minute video today to tell you how to take better pictures using just this. Yes, that's right. It is possible to take pictures that look like a professional's taken them just using one of these. Doesn't matter what model, what make you've got, it's the thinking behind it that will make you better. This video is specific to thinking about textiles, fabrics and fashion items that you can concentrate on to use on your Instagram, your social media, LinkedIn and other platforms, blogs, to show off what you want people to see. It doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to use a massive camera like this to get the kind of results I can achieve using just one of these. So, stay tuned. It's 45 minutes, so I've presented it like a lecture would be in a room, but the difference is I'm going to ask you to be on your phones. I'm going to ask you to look at your phones, play with your phones, think about what I'm telling you, look at the example slides, and then see if you can use that to apply it to a better way of thinking of the next time you're going to press the shutter. This is my website, pictoriapictures.com, and why not go on there, have a look, scroll through my portfolio and look at the About Me. Have a little look around, because that way you'll get to know me a bit better as I'm not meeting you in person. So, you ready? Let's begin.
So the question is, do you know your device? We've all got different devices and each one has different characteristics. We might have a Samsung, an Android, an iPhone, a Huawei. They're all different. They might be old, they might be new. They do have the same basic approach. What you need to do is look up the things that you want to know about. People don't normally bother to look up anything, but if you do look up how you can use different modes on the camera. So you can use video, photo, landscape and such like. Perhaps there's a little tiny clock looking thing that is the timer. You can use that for a few different approaches, not least to keep your hand steady. So if you choose the 3-second timer on your phone and you press the phone button, you've actually got 3 seconds to hold it nice and steady with both hands to avoid any kind of camera shake. That's dead handy and people don't really think of it. Flash, that's a trick question. I don't really bother with flash. Focus, most people know now that by touching the screen at any point within your frame, that is the point that the camera will focus on. So if you want something to be close to you in focus, touch that item on the camera screen. If you want the furthest thing away from you to be the point of focus, so in other words, if it's a landscape, touch the landscape, that will all be in focus and you can control that. A lot of people don't bother, they just take the actual frame picture with the red button, but you don't need to. You can control what's sharp. Be sharp, think about it. Lighting's the same. Wherever you touch the screen, that's where the camera itself will gauge the exposure of the shot. Filters, again, trick item. I don't use filters when I'm taking photographs, but I do sometimes use them afterwards to edit pictures. And also, the thinking behind that is take the picture in its natural form, and then after you've captured the picture, you can muck about with it, make it black and white, jazz up the colours, things like that, but take it in its natural form. So how do you hold your phone? Well, the default position these days, simply because we're used to looking at the screen with the phone in an upright position, the second we lift it to take a photograph, the default position nowadays is to have the phone in a vertical way. Of course, traditionally, using cameras and historical devices to record photography, everything was always in a wide format to match our field of view. The classic way of framing something, which we would call an orientation of wide. So upright is default these days and wide isn't. So my advice to you as creators is try to capitalise on being a little bit different, doing it well. So hold your camera on its side instead of upright. Make pictures that fit in slots that are standard. So if you're taking pictures that will go on website, Etsy, Instagram, Facebook, the default for those is also wide. You see the mix match there. Most of the population taking upright pictures when we've got wide spaces to put them in. So if you're going to be really good at marketing and showing people what you've done, think wide, think the bigger picture. Get sharp. Make decisions on what's the sharpest thing in your shot. You might have done some kind of limited edition print on a fabric. You might want to make sure that you've pressed the screen to make sure that it's pin sharp on one part of that textile or fabric so that one motif is absolutely sharp. You might prefer to be taking a shot that has a lot more in the view of it, but always do check that something in your shot is sharp. Don't just lift and point the camera. Make sure you keep in touch with what you're photographing, which means touching the screen. Get the light right, the same thing as we just mentioned. Wherever you touch the screen, at the view that you're looking at, that's how the camera will expose for your picture. Yes, you can fiddle about with it afterwards in a post-edit. You can lighten the picture in a basic edit. That's easy to do, but why not get it right first time? Lock and swipe is a technique that I use, which is quite tricky to explain, but here goes. If you point your phone at the view in front of you and you keep your finger depressed on the screen until a yellow square comes up. That's how it is by default in iPhone, but also in other makes of phone it's a similar thing. You hold your finger on the screen until a square pops up. That means it's locked focus. If you then touch somewhere else on the screen and scroll up and down with your finger pressed on the screen outside of that box, it will enable you to control the lightness and the darkness of that frame. Let's see if I've explained that well. Try it out. And turn your thinking upside down. Well, this is another little hack. Look at the back of your phone right now, and if you look at it, you'll see that in most models, apart from the centralised ones, your lens is at the top of the camera if you're holding it upright. Just have a look and study that and think about how changing how you hold the camera, whether it's turning it upside down or turning it round 90 degrees, how that affects the perspective of what you're photographing. So if you're very close to a piece of fabric and you then actually turn the phone entirely up the other way, suddenly your lens will be much, much closer to the fabric. Have a play with it. See what happens. It's a really good thing to experiment with. So, if you're sitting comfortably, then that's always a good start for thinking about how your photograph's going to look. Think about the image that you're just about to make and who is going to look at it. What's the purpose of your photo? Is it to sell something? Is it to show someone a really unusual thing that you've made? Or is it to demonstrate a really impressive skill that you've pulled out of the bag? Have a thought first before you record that shot who you want to look at it. And you're the one who's got the camera in your hands. Yes, all the other people in the room are also holding phones and they may equally want to be able to take good pictures too. But all you need to worry about is that you know what you're doing. You have the power to take really, really fantastic pictures as long as you focus. So everybody always makes jokes about how long we stare at our screens for, how long we look at stuff online. For the moment that you are going to be photographing something in order to share it with other people, you need to be fully focused and you need to think about how good it's going to look. Because if you go to take a photograph thinking, oh no, I don't think this is going to be very good, I bet you can't guess what the result probably might be just because you thought it. So be positive, stay focused. I don't know if you're like me, but you soon will be if you take pictures well. Let's just do a quick experiment. I get a little bit bored if I'm just listening to someone talk about stuff, so I like to try the theory for myself. If you're listening to this on your laptop or on a computer, then great. Get your phone out and get it ready because I'm going to get you to take a photograph while you're listening to me. The ideal thing to practice on because of your industry is a piece of fabric. So perhaps take a scarf, something that you're wearing, maybe even a small piece of fabric, and just place it on the desk in front of you. And I want you to look at it and have a think about how you can make a good photograph of that. The truth is, most people overthink this part. It's easy to enjoy looking at something. You don't have to, it's not permanent. You don't have to commit to a certain angle. You can move where you're standing from. You can look at it from different angles. But it can be quite overwhelming to think that you've got to take a photograph that's great in one shot. So have a look at these examples here. We've got something that's been created by arranging the fabric in a round shape. We've got another view on the right here, which is taken from above in a very, very parallel way, and also with some thought to the neatness of the frame. And then take a look at the third example. This is using the environment to showcase another texture, or textile in this case. So here I've used a door and I've deliberately draped the fabric over it, and I'm standing in a normal way looking out away from me, whereas the one above it, of course, is looking straight down onto a fabric. Have a think about what your angle is. Does it matter how neat it looks? Does it need to stand out against a background? Do you need to show a shape? Circles are great because they make the person feel like they're involved in the picture. Straight lines are good because it appeals to people's uniformity and how they like things to be in order. Just make a decision on which you prefer before you take the shot. Or cheat and take both. My next tip to you is simple. It's to simplify. Often the most simple pictures are the most eye-catching. This particular scarf, I wound it up. I thought very carefully about how neat I wanted the roll to be. It's not particularly neat down the back of the picture, but you can't see that bit. I've made it simple. I've used circles again, and I've had a good think. If you're in the industry where you appreciate the textures of textiles and the prints and design of things like this, then you're the perfect person to arrange them. Don't underestimate the power that you have to get involved with your picture and break it down and make it as simple as possible. And look, I've put it on the back of a sofa here, and I've deliberately made sure that there's nothing cluttering up the background. That's just wallpaper, and I'm quite far away from it. So we're all focused on your roll of fabric. Also, I've touched the screen where the fabric is to make sure that that is pin sharp. That's why the background has gone out of focus. If you have a newer iPhone or the Huawei, there are settings such as portrait mode, which means that you can decide on something being sharp in the camera, and you can also decide on just how much it throws the background out of focus. If you know how to do that, have a play with it. It will help your product no end because it just throws all of the spotlight on your fabric. Don't forget what I said about lighting. Touching the screen in different places before you actually take that frame means that you're controlling the sharpness and brightness of the shot. I've really simplified in this. In fact, I've got down on the ground. I've got down on the floor to do this one. And I've really had to think about how neat everything is. Again, you might like things to be free-flowing and fluid, and that's good, but I'd always advise about taking a neat picture, then maybe a messy one. Photography and design are all about contrast and synergy. Again, two things that contrast very much. So doing something neat and then untidy can give you a choice later to look at the both and either choose to use both of them, either of them, or none of them. But here I've touched the screen to make sure that the items are bright and that they are sharp, and I've deliberately gone into a space that has no distracting background. I'm keeping things simple for you today in terms of composition. Composition, if I was with you right now in the classroom, I'd be really stressing to you how important it is to think about the composition. In business, it's all about the competition and making sure you're ahead of it. So in composition, it's all about thinking, are you mindful of it? So you can fill the frame with what you're looking at. You can use a rule of thirds, which for the purposes of how I'm interacting with you now, I would look up on Google the rule of thirds and just examine in a couple of paragraphs what it means. You can turn the grid on your camera and use the grid as a guide to place things intersecting on a third in or a third down from the top or a third up from the bottom. These things throw the eye off everything being centralised, and it's a rule that you can use to automatically make your pictures work. Of course, you can centralise things too. There are rules in photography, just like there are rules in life. They're not legislation, they're just rules. And you can use them or leave them. And they can really complement, especially textiles, because draping something across or throwing the eye off the middle of the photograph really does make people look around what you've made. I've put in the little prompt there about going with or against the grain. Think about the texture of your fabric. Think about the surface of it and how you can show that. Do you need to get closer to it? Do you need to make sure that the natural light is falling on it in such a way that you need to just bob about and see how it looks as you move your camera and see how it catches it? Have a look. Examine what's in front of you and decide if it's in the right place for you. Shape. As I said before, you can start delving into really clever ways to catch people's eyes, but actually sometimes people just like uniformity. Look at this shot that's been made. They've been really careful to make everything symmetrical. Symmetry is really pleasing to the eye. They use symmetry a lot when they are evaluating about what's aesthetically pleasing to the eye. So we're moving into art, photography and fashion too. Often when you're putting together a piece, you would be mindful of how those things go together. So why not use symmetry in your images, especially on Instagram when you're using a square composition, if you wish, when you post your photo. That can be quite exciting because it can be exciting to mix it up. So I've included both these slides about rule of thirds and symmetry and shape to make you think more about whether it's neat and tidy or whether you're contriving what people look at in the shot. So maybe it's time to think about context. We've talked about basics and the shape of the things in front of you and being mindful of how they sit in front of you. But what about context? Where is your item going to be used? Where is it going to be hung? Where do you want people to see it? And where might they use it? So you can see from these three examples here, the first one is all about scarves and rolling fabric up because I wanted to simplify it. But really I wanted to show people that this thing is available in different colours. In essence, it's the same product, but it's available in 3 colours. I think this says this really, really well. And because there's nothing distracting apart from the 3 rolls, it's really obvious what I want you to look at when you're looking at this photo. The one underneath is a little bit more artsy, and if you've not quite figured it out straight away, it is the view through a load of hangers. Now, this could be really useful if you're just really, really wanting to show a repeating pattern, or some garments that you've made. They're all different, but they actually all use the same style of fabric. It could be just something you want to do to catch someone's eye, but then have extra pictures, supplemental pictures, which we'll get onto in a minute. For any project, I would never just do a one-shot deal. In the press, when I've worked over the years, you'd never come back from a job with one photograph. And because of digital and never-ending camera rolls often, you have the luxury of selection. If you don't feel comfortable making that selection on the spot, there's nothing to stop you taking 8 to 10 different types of photograph of one thing, and then just deciding what you're going to use afterwards. The shot on the right, of course, is the type of shot that might be used to display something being put on. Not something that will appeal to everybody, because you might just be producing fabric or weaving something together or knitting something, and you just want to show the texture. But again, if you wanted to show some kind of context, then you might consider adding props. We'll come back to that shortly. I worked in the media for 20 years, and the biggest thing we were always asked by our editor before we did a story in the newspaper was, who are you writing it for? Who's going to read it? Who are you telling this to? Whose story is this? Who cares, basically, in short? Well, who is your thing for? Have you made something? Have you printed something? Have you woven something? Well, you must have something in your mind about the character of the person that might wear it or use it, or where it might go, or what it's for. Sometimes people, they want to be guided as to what they might use this thing for. Shopping buzzwords on social media and imagery used for Instagram accounts and Instagrammers and influencers. They're always thinking of who they're talking to, who is their audience. If you're not quite sure about this, then why not ask someone else? Why not have a bit of a straw poll? Why not even post something on your Instagram and ask people what they think? Get a feel for something and then sort of translate it back to them. People like to be guided, and they want to picture having that item that you've created. And sometimes you just need to direct that a little bit. Don't be scared to put some context into it and present it, just like you would present what you've made. This is an extra chance, if you will, to show it in its very best light. Scale is really important in photography. It's both a tool and also a reference for what we're doing. So your purpose for posting pictures on Instagram is to show people something, and scale is not really something we spend too much time thinking about. If you study these 3 images that I've selected, you can see that there are very obvious things in all 3 that we know the size of. So we know roughly how big a door handle is, and we know roughly how big a mug could be. Unless we're mucking about with scale, that's another thing. But generally, if you include something that people know the scale of in your image, or maybe a hand on a human or something like that, it enables them to really enjoy what you've photographed. Think about where you position it as well. Think about the simplicity that I've already talked about. The top right is an example of what we call in the trade a lay flat. A lay flat is something that influencers and bloggers use to put an item in an environment. So as you can see here, we've got a knitted or crocheted item in red, but they've also included some different elements and even a knife there to show what they're up to. They're kind of random, but it works, mainly because of the colour of that one. The one underneath, where the scarf is draped in between 2 handles, is quite random. You probably wouldn't use the scarf to keep your door shut. It's not really a locking device, but it is something that might make people look again and think, what the heck's that? So think about scale and think about how it plays a part with what you're putting in your shot. Texture. It's really important in your design thinking, and it's also extremely important in when you're executing photography itself. Light is what falls on the surface that you're looking at, and you need to be mindful of how it falls on it. If you're about to take a photo of some fabric which is placed onto a surface which is far away from a window, and you look around the room and you see that actually there's a surface much closer to the window that has loads of light falling on it, then move. Move your stuff. Just move it. If it's late at night and you're thinking, oh no, I need to get pictures of this because I want to get it on Instagram in the morning, well, take the pictures in the morning. Wait for the natural light. You can play around with what light you've got available in your living room or in the library or in your classroom. Yes, you can do that. It often will have a yellow tinge. I wouldn't advise using the flash facility on the camera. They're not far advanced enough yet to give you something to play with. If you really must use extra light on what you're photographing, one thing that I can strongly recommend is using an LED light. You can use these little credit card sized torches that you get for Christmas sometimes in your stocking, or a bicycle light, and shine it on the fabric in front of you, because that will actually give you a bit of illumination, but not from where you're standing. You need the light to fall on the thing in front of you from a different angle, from the side perhaps. Also, you should move. Move around. Don't move everything when you've set it up. Just bend your knees a little, lift the camera, lower the camera, tilt the camera, and just see if it makes any difference to how the light's falling on its surface. You may well find a really dramatic difference in shades if you just move 2 or 3 centimetres one way or the other. Trust me, have a play, maybe even look now while you're watching this video at the fabric in front of you. Just see how the light changes if you just literally tilt the camera very slightly. While we're still thinking about texture, why not mix it up? If you've made different things and you've produced different things, sometimes those things can collaborate, a bit of a collab in the frame in front of you. You can use bright light. I did just say to you just now to not shine light on it from your phone. But if you see here in this example picture, they're very bright colours, and they've been placed deliberately in bright direct sunlight on a windowsill to take this shot, or indeed on an area indoors or outdoors where the light's shining very, very harshly on it. That can really bring out bright colours, but it can wash out other colours like black, white. If you have a white fabric, it can really muck about with the highlights and burn it out, so you'll lose a lot of detail. So be careful, but see if you can make light work for you instead of just going with the flow. It's really important, and mix it up. I want you to really focus now and be really selective. What is important? Is it the star on your fabric, on your knit, on your weave? Is it a fringe? Is it the print? Is it a tiny detail? Is it a button? Is it something that you want to tell me to look at? Well, we're going to just reiterate this in a minute about the selection of pictures you should always capture with a project. But you are limited with your camera on just how close you can focus, so be mindful of that. As a rule, a finger's length between you and what you're photographing at least is necessary for the camera to cope with focusing. If you are too close to something and you're touching the screen and wondering why it won't cope, it's because you're too close. But generally, if you want to move around the screen, just touching on different areas, but as we said before, just make sure you're being really sharp with this and pick the sharpest thing that you want me to look at. Don't just be general. Be a creator and tell me what's the best thing about this item that you're photographing. Show me. Use all the things I've talked about so far to come together. And you can see on the left here, it's a very symmetrical approach with a bit of a flip to just throw everything off balance. And on the right hand side, I've gone in very close, but I've been really selective with what's sharp. Okay, let's talk about edit very briefly. You may or may not have played around with the edit on your camera before. Let's talk in terms of iPhone, just to be selective about a make of camera. So on the iPhone, when you have taken a photograph, it is possible to take that photograph from your camera roll, and when you've got it up on your screen, you can choose to edit it. This is pretty easy. It's on the top right of the screen. There is a word, edit. It's just there on the top right of the screen. And when you get your edit screen come up, you get some choices of what to do. Now, going to the bottom of the screen, on the iPhone, you've got something that looks like a sunshine, something that's got 3 circles, and then a square that looks like a crop mark. It is a crop mark. I would never really overly crop your pictures. Try and be disciplined and fit what's fitting into the frame. I would never really crop your picture to a real extreme panoramic or a square or an extreme upright, because then you're going to have trouble when you try and post them to social media or use them on a blog or a website, because they make the carousels for the picture spaces in kind of uniform ways, and your picture will end up with little black borders if you've decided to select something a bit different. So try and keep a bit the same with that, but I'll draw your attention to the little thing that looks like the sunshine on the left hand side at the bottom. And you'll notice you can scroll with your finger through a carousel of different options, and usually in order it says auto, exposure, brilliance, highlights, shadows, contrast, and so on. Take time to explore what each of these does. So perhaps you'll decide to stop on the carousel where it says shadows. This is a brilliant one. I'll show you an example in a moment on the next slide. You can play around with the shadows by lightening and darkening on the scale underneath. Just observe what it does to your picture and think about ways you can use this. If you're, for example, taking a picture like this one right here, this is looking a little bit flat, a little bit dark, and if you notice on the bottom left, the knit is looking really muddy and I can't really make out the texture of it. So let's have a look at the next slide and see what you can do. So I've played around with the previous picture to give you 4 options of what you can do with it. On that carousel we just spoke of, you've got all these options and they're called these things: exposure, highlights, shadows and vignette. Now the exposure is exactly what you would imagine. By selecting exposure and then using your finger to go up and down on the scale, you can brighten it and darken it. But you see, on this example, we still haven't really managed here to get any detail in the texture of the red item at the bottom. So if you look underneath that to shadows, when you actually go on to shadows and you start playing with the scale on there, when you actually lighten the shadows, it takes all the shadows away, and look at the difference. You can suddenly see the strands and you can see what makes up that what's coming across the corner there. Okay. If you look at highlights, top right, you'll see, if you play with it on your phone, that you can control the really bright parts of the picture. So if you've got some bright parts like the mug rim and the white paper, you can lighten and darken those. So if they're burning out a bit and causing a bit of a hot spot, you can control that. And vignette, I absolutely love. If you choose vignette, which you go along the scale all the way to the right normally, and it just says the word vignette and it has a circle on it, what you're doing by sliding up and down the scale, you'll be able to see in live form on your own camera, you're making a vignette, you're coming in at the edges to darken the edges, to draw people's attention to the centre of the photo. So all of these same photos are actually different versions of the same photo. I've just played around with them. So see the difference. To me, I prefer looking at the one on the right at the bottom because it has all the elements. We've lightened the shadows, we've darkened the highlights, and we've vignetted it a bit. And it looks way better than the original, which you saw on the previous slide. And finally, choice. Choice is absolutely massive online. As consumers, we are bombarded with choice every single day, and it can be quite overwhelming, to say the least. So, something I do as a professional practicing photographer is I always make sure I've got a choice of shots, even if it only seems like there's sort of one option. So if you look at these 4 here, these are sort of the guideline for what you should always aim to try and do. I always take a wide and I always take an upright. I always include some scale and I always give it some context. And I always do something that's a little bit of a funny angle. Perhaps that's the picture on the bottom right, left there, of the pockets or the samples. So I've made a list here of your set, and I'm going to ask you to try out the theory now. I would say, as a rule of thumb, until you develop your own style, try always taking at least 4 photos of something you want to show. So, your first photo, you could always do a shot from above looking down in a symmetrical way. Then drape your fabric or your weave or your knit or whatever you've printed. Drape it somewhere or hang it somewhere or have it in a way that it is showing flow, how the texture of it is, perhaps movement in it. Include some scale in your photo, but we've already gone over that, so that's kind of elementary. So, just to recap, something from above, something to show it being draped, something to show scale. So actually, you could almost argue that the one with the tape measure here is my example for that. They are interchangeable though, but the scale of the tape measure clearly indicates it immediately how big that is, and the hand as well, because we generally know how large a hand is. And then a quirky close-up. That's what I'm calling that one on the bottom left, a quirky close-up. Something that's maybe out of focus in the background and pinch up where you want it. It's just a bit quirky, it's not straight on, it's not boring, and it's not symmetrical. It's just a little bit off, okay? So we're going to test this theory now. So in order to be fabulous, we always need to try stuff as we go along. This will all become second nature to you soon. But if you don't have anything very specific with you, I would ask you to grab something and create a set of 4 photos of something, following what we just said about a moment ago. So you need 4 shots. You need one from above, something symmetrical. You need to drape it somewhere or have it showing the flow of the fabric or item. You need to do another one that shows scale, and you need to do one that's a bit quirky or a bit of a close-up. You're then going to produce obviously 4 frames. Think about whether they're wide or upright. If you spin the video back, you can see that 2 of those were upright and 2 of them were wide. Again, a really nice mix, because sometimes when you have to produce a project or a mood board for someone or some kind of pitch to somebody about something, they don't want to see all the same kind of photo or all the same orientation. So let's try it. Let's see what you can come up with. 4 photos, a selection, all of one thing in 4 different ways. And what are you going to do with those pictures? I can give you feedback if you put them on Instagram. That's right, if you do a post on your Instagram account and follow the instructions here on screen with putting textiles in the post and tag either of my Instagram accounts, I'll give you feedback and likes, and I'll give you private feedback too if you prefer. Watch out when you're posting. You do not have to be restricted to square posts. Use the arrows in the bottom left hand corner on the preview post ability, and you can toggle between full frame and not full frame. Just as a way of signing off, I'd encourage you, normally in a lecture at the uni, where we would open a bit of dialogue and I'd just check with you what you've learnt today and what you've got from what I've explained to you and the kind of insight I've given you, whether you've instantly picked anything up. I can't do that today because I'm not with you and you're watching this in a remote way, but I can include the same slide and just ask you to reflect on any notes that you've made and think about how it's going to help you make your pictures pop, because what's important is in learning photography, you don't truly learn what you're doing until you just go out and practice it. So please do practice it. Do use these methods to apply them to any social pictures you take, any other stuff you do in your daily life, and you will notice that your pictures elevate to probably a better quality than they were before you watch this video, which will make me very, very happy. Before I go, I want to thank you for watching this video, and I really hope that it has made you think of your pictures in a different way and realise that you have the skills to use, you just probably didn't tap into them yet. You are creatives because you're interested in this industry of textiles and fabric and fashion, so you obviously care about how things look, and now you'll be able to care even more about how your photography looks. It's your voice and it's the way that you present beautiful things that you've made, and I hope that you can use it confidently enough to create some really powerful photos. Good luck everybody, and if you have any queries at all or questions following this video, my email is pictoria@myself.com.